Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you all this evening, and a privilege to be able to speak to you on what is an ever-changing topic when we look at the topic of digital and online safety, and one that I suppose is quite a concern to most of us, educators or otherwise, to be honest, and parents. It's one of these areas when you think about the online world. It's one of the few areas that the children often know more about the risks than the adults who are supposed to be protecting them, and therefore that can be difficult for us to think about as educators and in terms of protecting them. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll have a look at what we're going to cover. And as ever, as Alicia said, this is being recorded, so we've got the opportunity for you to reflect on this and look back at it later on as well. So in terms of online safety, then, if we start with keeping children safe in education, as ever, there's just a few things just to remind you in terms of those requirements that all education settings need to put in place. The first one is if we look at part one, the information that all your staff who've got access to children should have read and understood. Within that, we've got paragraph 12, just to draw everyone's attention to, that says very clearly that all staff should get online safety training at induction, and all staff should get an online safety update at least annually. Now, we, as many of you know, because we do them with a lot of schools nationwide, we do lots of friendly pairs of eyes reviews of schools. And of course, we work with lots of schools going through both ISI and Ofsted inspections. And often the online safety, of course, is a key focus, but actually making sure that that training is current, that all staff have had it, and it's as effective as it can be, needs to be a key priority for a lot of settings and often gets flagged. So just making sure you've got it in the induction arrangements, just making sure you've got an annual update for colleagues. And then if we look a little bit later on in the management of safeguarding part two, you'll see paragraph 148 talks about the fact that schools, or the recommendation that schools should consider carrying out an annual review of their approach to online safety, and supporting that is an annual risk assessment. So this should be something we're looking at regularly, annually, and updating, because as you know, the risks are evolving constantly, and therefore our provision needs to do that in order to reduce risk. So there's recommended free tools you can use, things like the 360-degree safe website, the London Grid for Learning audit. You can get people in like us to do it. You can do it internally, whatever it is. Are you reviewing your online safety approach annually and looking at how things need to improve? So when we think about what are we talking about here when it comes to an online safety whole school approach? Well, really, I would say, and practically, there are 8 distinct areas to it. The first one is leadership. Have you got an operational lead who knows what they're doing, who's had up-to-date training, who knows how to lead the school's provision? So that officially has to be the designated safeguarding lead, because it's in Annex C, the job description for DSLs, that your online safety is the ultimate responsibility of your designated safeguarding lead. But in practice, many schools and colleges have an online safety coordinator working as part of that team, or someone with a bit more expert knowledge who is line managed by the DSLs. Either way, have you got an operational lead in place who's trained, who's up to date? Secondly, oversight. Have you got governors and the ability to scrutinise, to provide that strategic oversight function and fulfil that in a way that is effective, not just here's a report on the number of online safety incidents we've had, but really able to get their teeth stuck into the provision to understand what's working, what are the risks, how do we need to move forward, and how do we support the team in doing so as well if you're a governor or a trustee. Thirdly, then, policy. Have we got a document that sets out clearly what we do, how we do it, why we do it, and that is compliant with keeping children safe in education and other key pieces of guidance when it comes to online risk? Fourthly, procedures. Do you do what it says you're going to do in your policy? That's the bit, of course, that ISI and Ofsted are interested in. Are you doing what you say you're going to do in that policy? They're going to test your procedures. And of course, with online safety, your procedures include filtering and monitoring systems, which we'll talk about again in a moment. Fifthly, culture. What is the culture like when it comes to online safety? Is it effective? And that really has a key element within it, which is the training of your staff. Have they had an annual update? Was it a decent annual update that really enabled them to understand risk and how to prevent harm? Or was it just lip service? And then, crucially, pupil voice. Where are the voices of our young people when it comes to online safety? I've already said, in many cases, they know way more about the tech than the adults who are supposed to be protecting them. But yeah, of course, we take their wishes and feelings into account when dealing with concerns. but do we also engage them proactively to try and prevent harm? Are we talking to them about how they're using the online world and the online spaces in order to try and identify proactive things we can put in place to reduce risk? Seventhly, linked to that, the curriculum. What are we educating about? Is it appropriate? Is it effective? Is it something that the young people find value in, as well as meeting the statutory requirements in terms of educating in that regard? I think often when we do the Friendly Pairs of Eyes reviews, we talk to young people about the online safety content of the lessons, and often the young people sort of say, oh, it's a bit rubbish, or it's a bit out of date, or the teachers are all teaching about apps that they don't know how to use themselves, and all that kind of thing. So I think making sure pupil voice feeds into the curriculum is also an essential part of any whole school approach, or an effective one anyway. And then finally, a crucial aspect that's often very hard to put into practice is parental engagement. How do we engage parents about these risks? How do we keep them up to date? And as many of you will know, you put on online safety information evenings, and sometimes the ones who turn up are the ones who you don't need to turn up, they're already on it. The ones that you really wish were there are the ones who are really hard to get hold of. But either way, how do we engage parents? What are the ways of doing it beyond just an information evening to make sure they stay up to date on the range of risks out there and how they're evolving? So let's just talk about filtering and monitoring for a moment or two. Again, coming back to keeping children safe in education, talks about governors and proprietors ensuring their school or college has got appropriate filtering systems in place and that they regularly review their effectiveness. So officially, the responsibility sits with the governing and proprietorial boards. However, in practice, of course, they will delegate a lot of that responsibility to the designated safeguarding leads and the senior teams. Now, to support schools in meeting the filtering and monitoring responsibilities, the DfE published the filtering and monitoring standards, which I'm sure many of you are very aware of, that sets out the different things that have to be in place. And it says very clearly in paragraph 141 that governors and proprietors should review those standards and discuss with the IT teams what needs to be done to meet them. Now, we want to make sure governors have reviewed those standards. Have they had a report that shows these are the standards, this is what we're doing in our school that meets these? And when we look at those standards, they're actually part of a wider suite of 11 different digital technology standards. Now, 2 of those relate to sort of safeguarding and the DSLs, the filtering and monitoring standards that I just mentioned, but also the 7 cybersecurity standards. The rest of them, I wouldn't lose too much sleep on if you were a DSL or a school leader, something to do with cable thickness and bandwidth and all those sorts of things, which I get is important. But from a safeguarding point of view, we're really thinking about filtering and monitoring and cybersecurity. Now, those 7 cybersecurity standards were updated about 10 months ago in March to include a lot more emphasis on the role of senior teams and governors, as well as those IT teams, when it comes to cybersecurity. And I think this is an area that's of crucial importance to all education settings, given the number of schools that were targeted by ransomware attacks last year and the impact of those when they are, I don't want to use the word successful, but when they are carried out, is huge. The filtering and monitoring standards were also updated. All of those now say these should already be met. So there's some key questions really to think about when it comes to filtering and monitoring in each of your settings. Firstly, can you evidence, if you were asked, whether review, an inspection, whatever it may be, can you evidence governor scrutiny of those filtering and monitoring standards? Can you evidence governor scrutiny of those cybersecurity standards? And have your governors and proprietors reviewed the effectiveness of your systems? Do they know they work? How can you prove that? And a recommendation is possibly to have a governor or trustee or proprietor with specific focus and responsibility around IT. This is such a growing area of concern that it shouldn't just really sit with your safeguarding governor or trustee, because it's a whole other area of work really ultimately. But it's also then would mean that you've got another member of the board that's got clear safeguarding understanding and knowledge to support the safeguarding governor. So enough of keeping children safe for a minute or two. If we look at how the landscape has changed when it comes to tech usage, we can look at Ofcom reports, and I'll show you various different things from Ofcom over this session this evening. If you look at the Children and Parents Media Use and Attitudes report, you can see there an infographic I've just taken out of that, which shows the top 5 online communication apps that are used by children and young people. And we can see that roughly 90% of children use YouTube or YouTube Kids across all ages. And then when we look at the next 4, WhatsApp, TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram, we can see the uptake there, or the usage by age group, as you can see from left to right, from 3-year-olds right up to sort of 16, 17-year-olds on the right-hand side. Now, WhatsApp, TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram all have a recommended age of access of 13. And what you can see from the graphic on the screen there is we have a sizable cohort of children under that age who are using those apps. And actually, when you look on the left-hand side, we can see we have roughly a third of preschool children now using WhatsApp and nearly a quarter of preschool children using TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram. So we've got a problem here, and that problem is often parents misunderstanding the risk, considerable underage access, and then parents kicking the can down the road. And what I mean by misunderstanding the risk is parents often think, well, I'm happy with my child using it. I tell them only to talk to their friends and other children. I monitor what they do and so on. And parents often think the risk is stranger danger in terms of sort of a dodgy middle-aged man pretending to be an 8-year-old playing Roblox with their child, the predatory paedophile model, as it were, which, don't get me wrong, of course, is an absolute threat. But when you look at sexual offences against children last year, I think there were 107,000 of them. Only 5% of them fit that model. In actual fact, over half of sexual offences against children last year were actually committed by other children. So actually, when we look at online and offline spaces, actually children are a greater risk than adults to other children, something parents misunderstand. And the other issue is kicking the can down the road. And what I mean by that is when you look at those 3-year-olds on the left-hand side there, someone, whether it's a parent or that 3-year-old themselves, has ticked I am 13 or they are 13 to get access to that platform. And so, yes, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, they can put parental accounts in place where parents can check friends and they can't talk to strangers and all of those things that the social media companies like to make a big PR statement on and so on. And we can get into the effectiveness of those or not. That's not my point, really. My point is that 5 years from now, those 3-year-olds are 8. But according to Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, and WhatsApp, they're now 18. And so you can put all the parental accounts or teen accounts in place that you want. But we've now actually got 8-year-olds on adult accounts, at which point those parental settings are taken off, at which point now you can have gambling adverts, porn pop-ups, and you do, of course, because that's how they monetize. And so the real problem is a few years down the line where we now have growing numbers, year on year, significantly growing numbers of children on adult accounts, adult social media accounts. And that's the problem that's not really been acknowledged. And that's the problem that parents can't really address retrospectively 5 years, well, too late. And no child in the history of children ever has contacted TikTok and Snapchat and said, look, I lied about my age 5 years ago. I'm still only 8. Could you take this off me for the next 5 years, please? It's not going to happen. And so that's one of the problems that we're seeing now, these huge numbers of children and on adult accounts. And you can see down at the bottom there from 2023 to 24, that 8 percentage point increase in the number of preschool children using social media. At this trajectory, by the end of this year, we'll be near 50%. So we've got that issue. We've also got the issue in terms of communicating with strangers and the risk that might or might not be posed there, and the reality of what this looks like. Now you can see on the left-hand side, roughly 3/4 of children play games with someone they know, and roughly a third of children talk to someone they know whilst playing those games. Played against people they don't know. Apologies, misread the figure there. On the right-hand side, 2/3 of those young people talk to people they know whilst playing those games, and a third of those young people, again, roughly, talk to people they don't know whilst playing those games. So if we think about the messaging of don't talk to strangers online, and yet we've got nearly a third of children who are doing this very regularly, sometimes every day in some cases. And so we've got to be clear about the messaging here. What are we saying to children? Don't talk to strangers online. Of course, we don't want them to do that and increase risk, but we've got to be careful that if we keep hammering that message home, then they're not going to tell us when things go wrong. And we know, and there's been various different studies by ChildNet, Childlight, and so on, national charities, showing that when children get into trouble online, particularly when they've used swear words, sexual references, a very small percentage of them actually tell their parents or tell their school. Why? Because they know what we're going to say. I told you not to do that. I can't believe you've done that. I told you not to do, and so on. But more importantly, they know what we're going to do. And what we're going to do, the default option usually for most parents is take the phones off them. That's it. Right, you've got into trouble online. You're banned from Snapchat for forever, or Roblox for 3 months, or take your phone off you and what have you. Online safety concerns are one of the few safeguarding categories where we routinely punish the victim. And so I think it's really important because when you look at Ofcom's data, it shows that children generally take part in one or less activity outside the home each week. So they are socializing, but they're doing it at home and they're doing it digitally through video calls, headsets, gaming, sitting next to each other, playing on the same games, whatever it is. There's a real digital element to the socialization. And so if a child gets into trouble and we take the phone off them, not only are they then being punished, but we're also removing their social cultural capital. And not only that, all of the other friends say, "Oh, look what happened when so and so told their mum. That's it. No one can see them again because they're banned on their phone, banned from their phone for however long." And so, how do we get the messaging right? Because if children think for any minute we're going to get banned from going on social media, I'm going to get banned from that gaming platform that all of my friends are on all the time, then they're going to take the risk of not telling mum and dad or not telling the school. And also, we need to not be hypocritical, don't we? What's online dating? Talking to strangers online, isn't it? So don't talk to strangers online unless you're going to marry them, then it's all right. So, I think when we look at the data, Ofcom, I don't know if it's Ofcom's data or not. I saw it a couple of months ago. Over half of relationships in the UK last year were formed by meeting someone online. So I can't remember where that figure came from now. But either way, my point stands, doesn't it? This idea that we do it as adults, but children shouldn't do it. Of course, we don't want them to be increasing the risk by doing this kind of thing. And of course, we want them to be safe and ideally not do it. But what's more important is that they learn how to keep themselves safe online. And crucially, that they learn how to tell us and feel like they can tell us when things go wrong. Because if they don't, that's when the abuse starts. So if we look at risks and developments over the last 12 months, there's kind of five main areas that I want to just talk about tonight. The first one is the rise in misinformation and disinformation that's out there. Conspiracy theories, fake news, and all of those sorts of things that you kind of fail to avoid if just looking at the media over the last few months and years. Secondly, sadly, again, we've had a further increase in online sexual exploitation and abuse of children. Victims are getting younger, they're getting harder to detect. Thirdly, growing concerns about the rapid development of AI. You've kind of failed to miss that if you've been looking at the news over the last few days as well. The need to regulate and so on. We've got the impact of the Online Safety Act, which is still not fully into force, but has been developed and embedded over the last couple of years now. And then we're getting more and more resources and organisations coming online to support education settings and parents. And yeah, absolutely. The last two potentially positive developments, depending on your perspective on the Online Safety Act, but I do think on balance it is going to do some good. And so let's just unpick some of these. If we come back to keeping children safe and we look at those areas of risk, the four C's as they're known, and I'm sure you probably know those without me reading them out to you. But when we look at the four C's, content, contact, conduct, and commerce, the four areas of risk, the red text was the new additions for 2025's version of Keeping Children Safe, September 25. And that includes misinformation, disinformation, including fake news and conspiracy theories. So if we think about misinformation and disinformation, if you're not clear on the definition of those two, misinformation is incorrect information that is online, spread online. Disinformation is misinformation that is deliberately spread online with usually some sort of intent behind it. And so there is an overlap there. The reason this has gone in, because we're seeing this absolutely everywhere. And when you think about the impact of misinformation in schools, I know I do a lot of workshops with staff and I do a lot of work with senior leaders and training safeguarding leads. We discuss this all of the time. And I think it's really important that DSLs are up to date on this, absolutely, as part of their training. But like us tonight, it's important that we all are. We're seeing various different impacts. So one of them is a rise in mental health issues because we're seeing a lot of fake threats and health scares and a lot of children being quite distressed by some of the content that they're encountering. We're seeing potentially an impact on academic performance because we get fake information included in schoolwork. We get skewed worldviews and prejudicial views, rise due to the rise in disinformation being spread about minority groups, religious groups. Again, very hard to miss that in the media. We get the erosion of trust in authority. We're seeing a decline in trust in teachers, the government, mainstream news sources, and people rather listening to what online influencers and the kind of the social media rabbit holes, as we call them, that people go down. We're seeing a rise in susceptibility to conspiracy theories and extremism as a result of that as well. We're often seeing physical harm presenting as well, where sometimes children as well as adults follow unsafe advice from online influences, follow extreme diets, take supplements which can cause harm as well. And we routinely get news stories along those lines. And then And I'm sure you can't fail to notice the misrepresentation of some school activities and incidents that often make it into the parental WhatsApp chat. That suddenly something's happened and then everybody's commenting it, and before you know it, World War Three's broken out on the school grounds and you didn't know about it. And the knock-on effect really of all of these is usually a lot of time for the senior leadership team, sometimes the governors, pastoral teams, and everybody else to deal with this misinformation that's spread. And so, really, what we're seeing is, yeah, lots of concerns that I've just listed 7 of there, but the reality is a lot of time for the senior team to deal with the misinformation. And we know one of the problems is that children are not getting their news from established media sources. They're getting it from social media sources. And so the issue is the lack of regulation of social media means that those social media companies are not responsible for the content they broadcast, the content they publish. Unlike broadcast media and published media, who are held accountable and are forced to apologise, as we've all seen in the media over the past few months, social media, things can be placed on there because it's like entertainment and gaming content. They're not responsible for the content that is there. That's why we see kind of some quite ridiculous ads on Facebook Reels, TikTok Shop, and so on, promising the world. We don't see those ads on the established mainstream media outlets because, well, they'd have to validate and verify the accuracy of their claims. And we've also seen a wider societal impact of this over the last 12 months as well, with the riots that we've seen, and you can't fail to have noticed from the summer of 2024, where we had misinformation that became about the very tragic murder of the 3 girls in Southport by Axel Raducabana, that then was deliberately spread on encrypted social media platforms that led to rioting in 30 plus cities across the country. So we're seeing the impact of this, and understandably, therefore, it's gone into keeping children safe, and it's an area that staff need training on. The second area is just to highlight the ongoing rise in child sexual exploitation and abuse. The National Crime Agency publishes a strategic assessment routinely and annually, in many cases, around lots of different national risks that they identify. One of the things they identify is the number of adults who pose a sexual risk to children, either digitally or physically. Now, the early versions of this data, the early figures they produced, were based on convictions and cautions. Adults who are convicted of or cautioned for crimes related to sexual offences in children. In the year 2020, they switched the model to look at intelligence. People who've been observed communicating with children, downloading or searching for child sexual abuse material. So not necessarily people who've been prosecuted or convicted, but people who've been identified with intelligence. And when you look at intelligence, the numbers go through the roof. So you can see we've gone from 300,000 in 2020 to the current estimate of somewhere between 710 and 840,000 individuals. Now, looking at the data, 80% of those are male. So that's 2% of the adult male population. Now, we get into the nature-nurture argument here, but that's a huge figure, isn't it? And just to put that in context for you, that's 10 times the prison population. And we all know the media in the last 2 days, the prisons are full. So what do we do about this? Because this data makes me want to cry as a parent, as I always say. One of the things we make sure training is effective, children are educated effectively in terms of keeping themselves safe, because we're not going to be able to put every one of these people in prison. And these numbers are increasing year on year. And as I said, we can get into the nature-nurture argument, but let's just look at how this translates across into harms, particularly where children are coerced into generating what the IWF, the Internet Watch Foundation, calls self-generated child abuse content. And that's where a child is tricked or coerced into abusing themselves or siblings, peers in front of a webcam, usually at the behest of an adult, although not always. Now, if you're not familiar with the IWF, they're basically the undercover good guys. They monitor all web traffic nationally and globally where they can, and they work with the National Crime Agency and others to take down harmful content and prosecute perpetrators of crime. Absolute hats off to them. I couldn't do their job. I'm so glad they do the amazing job that they do, because they monitor websites constantly. And I think they monitor a website every 1.5 minutes, and every 2 minutes they come across child abuse. So it's huge. Their analysts have therapy every single day. So amazing work they do, and much needed, but a horrendous task, really. If you look at the number of web pages they took down each year that host self-generated abuse content, now that could be a web page that's got one image on it, or it could be a web page that's got a library of images on it. But in 2020, they took down 68,000 web pages hosting self-generated abuse content. In 2021, they took down a further 182,000 web pages. In 2022, they took down a further just under 200,000 web pages. In 2023, it was over 250,000 further web pages. And in 2024, it was over 290,000 web pages. Now, as the IWF say, this should be entirely preventable, really, because the common denominator here is a child, a device, and a bedroom. There's usually no one else present. And so when we look at the data here, when you look at that 291,000, if you look at the ages, the vast majority are children between the ages of 7 and 13, vast majority of them. And when you look at the gender of those children, 99% girls in those images. So actually the biggest risk is a girl, key stage, top of key stage 1 up to key stage 3, smartphone, bedroom. Hence why they sort of say this should be entirely preventable. And then linked to that, we've had a rise in sextortion, which is similar, an image coerced out of a child. However, sextortion often has a sort of financial gain or motive behind it. And what we see, the data around sextortion, significant increase again, 72% increase in a year. But sextortion seems to be targeted more at boys. 97% of those cases the IWF dealt with were boys, often teenage boys. And it often starts with a conversation, befriending on Snapchat or Instagram. The conversation gets flirty very quickly, sexualized, and an image is sent in the hope the victim will reciprocate. And the image is usually a nude sexualized image, and the hope the victim reciprocates. And when they reciprocate and you can identify that victim, then the blackmail starts. And we know there's been significant, horrendous consequences for some young people who've been caught up with this. And we know that AI is making this easier to perpetrate because it's easy to generate a fake image to send in the first place. A very credible, believable fake image. We'll talk about AI in a moment. So we've seen lots of schools that we work with as consultants and support are dealing with sextortion cases, and it's really important those children as well as the staff are supported in dealing with these incidents effectively. There are a lot of support resources out there, the National Crime Agency, CEOP, Childline, loads of really useful resources to support adults and parents and of course the children involved. And then for DSLs and school leaders, there's guidance and support out there from the National Crime Agency and CEOP and IWF and the UK Council for Internet Safety in terms of dealing with incidents that involve AI-generated abuse material, sharing of nudes, semi-nudes, even if there's AI involved as well. So bear that in mind. There is support out there and guidance out there in this very complex and rapidly evolving area. Which leads me on to the third area to talk about, which is the growing concern around the rapid development of AI. Now, I'm going to tell you lots of negative stuff here. Personally, big fan of AI. I think it's amazing, and I think there is a lot of potential to be very effectively used in education. And I know we've had previous Wednesday wisdom sessions with Darren Coxon and others talking about the effectiveness of AI, and I really do think it is an amazing educational resource, and it's going to change the world. I really do think that. If you look at things like the announcement of the Eden database yesterday, which generating new medicines, it's phenomenal what it's already doing. However, we've got to think about safeguarding, which is my job, of course, and the mental health implications. And so when we need to think about AI, one of the key things that all school leaders need to think about, and college leaders, is how is AI being used in your setting? By your staff? What about by your parents? And then crucially, what about by your pupils and students outside of school? And this is an area the DFE's been quite vocal on over the last 12 months or so. So if we look back in January 25, we got guidance from the DFE around the expectations, the sort of policy paper. And it said very clearly that absolutely in education, we should be thinking about AI because we can create resources, plan lessons, save time on admin tasks, create personalized learning, revision tasks, all of those sorts of things, as well as effectively reduce the workload of teachers and free up time. So definitely really exciting potential. However, we've got to bear in mind we can get inaccuracies, we can get bias, we can get inappropriate use, unsafe content, and so on. And so they, at the same time, release the product safety expectations around generative AI platforms. And it says very clearly in that AI use should be carefully considered. We need to make sure the benefits outweigh the risks, that we shouldn't compromise safety, and that crucially, we should risk assess all of the AI products that we are using and absolutely make sure we are sticking to the statutory requirements in keeping children safe. So why have we got this big focus on it? Well, because as you know, AI is absolutely everywhere now. You don't need me to point out to you, do a Google search now, you'll see the AI response first. I think it was Google's own data saying the majority of us now don't do anything else. We just read the AI response and think, yeah, that'll do. That's answered my question. That's given me the info I need. So we know it's absolutely everywhere, and we know its use is expanding rapidly. We talk about safeguards being built in, but essentially there aren't many safeguards being built in. We are sort of in basically a digital arms race between the US and China in terms of who can go where, and neither side wanting to really heavily regulate because it will give the other side an advantage. And so we're seeing applications being developed all over the place, many educational benefits, many fun ones, many really interesting ones, many scientifically advantageous ones. But we're also seeing some that, of course, have safeguarding problems associated with them. Things like the virtual girlfriend sites, the celebrity chat sites, the image generators. And all of those, you think about tasking AI with generating an image 3-4 years ago or 3 years ago when we got ChatGPT 4, you could tell it was an AI generated image. Now, 2-3 years later, really hard to tell, particularly without the right software. And so when you look at some of the virtual girlfriends, boyfriends, when you look at some of the celebrity chats, incredibly realistic images. We've also got the problem that those can be engaged in sexualized conversations, can generate nude images or indecent images. And when we think about the image generators, well, you don't need me to point out the controversy and the spotlight that's been put on Grok, which is X's version of AI, just in the last few days for doing exactly that. So the issue is lack of regulation, and the issue is children using it, perhaps in an unsupervised way, perhaps without parents knowing. So if we look at children's use of AI, if you look at the Internet Matters report from the summer, Me, Myself and AI, you can see they looked at, really interestingly, vulnerable children's use compared to non-vulnerable children's use. And you can see the purple columns, about 20% of children come under that vulnerable category. And you can see more vulnerable children than non-vulnerable children as a percentage use AI. And they use the big players, don't they? ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, Snap's My AI, and Copilot, because those are the big four that are out there. They also use the others too. If we look at why they're using them, well, on the left-hand side, I haven't got a problem with any of those. Curiosity, finding out information, help with schoolwork, just for fun. I think we do as adults, don't we? The ones on the right-hand side, a bit more of a concern, seeking advice. Well, what advice are you getting and being given? Just chatting? What are you chatting about? I want a friend. Look at the vulnerable children compared to the non-vulnerable children there. And then for emotional help and therapy. Again, depends on what the advice is being given there. Then when you look at children's views on AI chatbots as companions, well, look at the difference here between the vulnerable and non-vulnerable children. On the left there, talking to an AI chatbot makes me feel happy. Talking to an AI chatbot is like talking to a friend, 50%. Look at the two on the right. I'd rather talk to an AI chatbot than a real person. And I use AI chatbots because I don't have anyone else to speak to. Major safeguarding concerns with those two on the right-hand side. And one of the problems we've got is how often the AI chatbots are designed with this sycophantic model that's designed to remember what you inputted, learn about you, remember that content, and use that to engage you next time. So you really do feel like it's growing into a friend. It knows you, it remembers things, but also it is kind, it is nice, or it responds in a way that it thinks you will like, because that way you engage more. It's a really clever way of getting you to use the platforms. The issue is when you think about vulnerable children who might often feel socially isolated, feel like they're a little bit different or don't quite fit in. Often, therefore, you can see why. Well, actually, the AI chatbot's not unkind to me. I enjoy talking to it. I'd rather talk to that, or I don't have anyone else to talk to. You can see why these figures are disproportionately high. The risk, though, is our already vulnerable children are now becoming even more vulnerable, not necessarily because of the advice they're getting, but just because of the removal of that social connection, the real world social connection protective factor that we often see. That's a really important mental health protection. And for those of you thinking, oh, we're just talking older children here, look at that, 9 to 12-year-olds at the top there using AI chatbots, 58%. I guarantee you 58% of parents don't know their 9 to 12-year-olds are using AI chatbots. So again, the need for parental engagement as part of that whole school approach is essential. And when we think about some of the safeguarding issues with AI, and as I said, I do need to talk about the doom and gloom. I am generally an optimist. You doubt it sometimes, I get given my job, but I do think the potential for AI is phenomenal. But we've got some safeguarding issues because of the lack of regulation and safeguards built in. So we know Meta's been investigated over the summer over its AI having centralized chats with children. We know X, we know Elon Musk's release of the AI companions Annie and Bad Rudy. I mean, Annie, infantile or juvenile in appearance, strips down to its underwear when flirted with quite quickly. Bad Rudy, red panda that just suggests crimes for people to commit, basically. I get the funny side of that from an adult point of view, but when you've got children using these, we've got more of a concern, haven't we? And then, of course, as I mentioned already, the focus on Grok um, in terms of the in a very inappropriate sexualized imagery of children, the illegal sexualized imagery of children that's been generated according to some of the media stories. And so, yeah, absolutely, we've got a real concern there. We've also got a concern around suicidal ideation, and very tragically, we've had 4 suicides that we know of relating to AI. Probably the most high-profile one was the Adam Rain case in the middle. That the Centre for Humane Technologies supporting the Rain family in suing OpenAI over Adam's death. He basically was feeling suicidal and talked to ChatGPT about that. And in the records, it shows he mentioned suicide over 200 times to Chat in different conversations. But Chat brought up suicide to him over 1,200 times in different conversations. And Chat taught him how to make a noose. Chat even told him to hide the noose in his room when he said, should I leave it outside my door for my parents to find, and things like that. So, real concerning failings when it comes to safeguarding advice, it would appear in that case. And of course, none of us want to be in that position with any of our students or for anyone else. So, what are the DfE's expectations? Well, this is what they recommended back in January. First of all, that schools and colleges block AI tools en masse. We automatically block them all, and then we re-allow them one by one when we vetted them, screened them, and risk assessed. So it's really important that you've got a policy that sets out your approach to AI, which applications you're using, and which tools you're allowing, and why, and the risk assessments. Oversight. Have your governors got oversight? Do they know what's going on here? Do they understand the risk? Have they had training on this? Staff had a training update. Pupil voice. What are they doing? Do you know what they're doing on AI? Are they going to tell you in a way where they don't feel judged, and all of those kind of things? And then curriculum. What are we educating? How are we educating? And then parental engagement as before. It's a whole school approach again, isn't it? You can see it in there, not written in 1 to 8, but it is that those 8 are all in there. So they raised some key questions in June for schools to think about. Firstly, what steps are you taking to make sure the AI tools that you use are GDPR compliant or UK GDPR compliant? We know that's a really important consideration, particularly if staff are using them to produce reports or including any sensitive data in there at all. Secondly, what processes have you got in place to handle these AI-related incidents? Are your colleagues confident in their ability to respond? Thirdly, how are you engaging parents and carers as part of your whole school approach? We just talked about that. And then fourthly, have you done those risk assessments? When you talk about those, for any tools that you're using, and how have you assessed the safety of them? So really important we think about those kind of things. It's an area we look at extensively when we're working with schools as well. Fourthly, we've had the impact of the Online Safety Act, which is the kind of last area of risk, I suppose, or it is positive, but it's not quite as positive as we hoped. So I'm sure you're aware the plan with the Online Safety Act was to identify that sort of red segment, the online dangers, and then over time put in regulation, accountability, risk assessments, remove harmful content, age assurance and verification so that we can create this safer online environment. So that was the plan. And the Online Safety Act has basically got 3 distinct phases to it. When the Act was passed at the back end of 2023, the first phase was addressing illegal harms on the content in various different platforms. And so the green line that you can see on each of those phases is the law enforcement powers, which of course come at the end. And so the first phase was the removal of illegal harms and social media companies stopping illegal content being on there, or being incentivized to do so anyway. The second phase is the one that very much came into force over the summer that you'll all be aware of, is the age verification around adult content sites. And then the third phase kicks in later this year, which is around transparency and sort of forcing tech companies to consider children in the design of their products. So we're kind of partway through this. It's an ongoing process. And I'm sure you saw the media stories over the summer when the age verification came in and we got the headlines saying porn traffic sites have plummeted. And everyone went, hooray, the Online Safety Act worked. And then about a week later, we got other headlines that said, actually, everyone's downloading VPNs and they're using that to access pornography without having to verify their ages by using, I'm sure you're familiar with VPNs, but if not, a virtual private network, which is basically an app you can download, which disguises the origin of your address, basically your IP address, and it makes it look like your signal might be coming from another country, and perhaps you could set it to be another country that doesn't have age verification. And so big outcry, we've got to stop children using VPNs to watch porn. So lots of people saying it hasn't worked. From my perspective, it has worked to a degree. What it's done is it's eliminated or reduced the accidental exposure to pornography. However, where there's a will, there's a way. And if children want to find a way to do it, just like adults, they will be able to do it. But it's worked to a degree, I think. And I think that is important that we do acknowledge that. But when we think about children's exposure to pornography, the Children's Commissioner updated their report from 2 years ago and the latest version back in August. And as they said, well, we've seen an increase in the number of children seeing pornography. It's about 70% now. And actually, as with many safeguarding risks, it's often the children with SEN who are more at risk. When we look at the age, we know that more than a quarter, 27% of children had seen pornography by the age of 11. So we're talking a primary issue now as well. And the youngest respondents in that survey was 6. And so when we think about that being a primary issue, what do we do if we've got primary age children in our settings? Because it's not like you can put lessons on pornography in your curriculum because, well, you're going to scare the living daylights out of the 73% of children who've never heard of it. And also imagine the number of AI written parental complaints you're going to get about that. So, what do we do about this? Because we still need to address it. One of the things we need to do is engage parents and say, look, bear in mind your child might have seen this. This is how you can respond. These are the resources. And that's, one of the things we do a lot of when we're working with schools, suggesting signposting appropriate resources and support. But actually, when we look at how children access pornography, well, 80% of the ways, 8 out of 10 children, shall we say, but 80% of them first encounter pornography not through those dedicated porn sites, but through social media. And the most common one, X. And when we think about X in the media over the last few days, very topical, isn't it? So the Online Safety Act, yes, it might have addressed dedicated porn sites and those accidental images that pop up on search engines. But when you think about the next for their Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, we've got a problem. We've got even more of a problem when we think about the number of underage children using those social media platforms as well. So one of the questions to think about is, how does your setting currently address the issue of growing children and young people's exposure to pornography? What do we do about it? How do we engage parents? What does this look like? Are we even talking about it? I think it's important that we reflect on this as school leaders. And then finally, we need to think about pupil voice when it comes to online safety. Mentioned it at the start as a key point of a whole school approach. We know a lot of children never tell anyone, let alone parents in school, about the worst thing that's happened to them online. And it's crucial when we come back to keeping children safe in education that we focus on paragraph 17, the one that all staff should have read. We need to remember children may not feel ready or know how to tell someone what's going on, that they're being abused or exploited. They may not recognise this is harmful. And so down at the bottom there, you can see it's our job, all of our jobs, to have professional curiosity and for us to determine how to build trusted relationships which facilitate communication. So key questions here, and then we reflect on this a lot when we do the sort of friendly pairs of eyes reviews and workshops with schools. How are you providing opportunities for pupil voice when it comes to online safety? Is it preventative? Are we engaging in people about the online world, the space, the things they find exciting? Or are we just responding to incidents and concerns and putting on assembly about Andrew Tate and everything else that comes up in the media and Grok and you name it? It's really important that we think about how we start that conversation about the online world. It's amazing what children will tell you when they feel like they're not getting judged and they can just talk about what they're interested in. And that then facilitates disclosures later on, of course, if they're worried. And it's really important that whatever messaging and whatever conversations we have with young people, that they hear some key messages. The first one is responsibility always rests with the perpetrator. It's not their fault. They're not stupid. They're not bad. They're not to blame. What's happened to them is perfectly understandable. They can recover and move on, and we can help them to understand what's happened, but only if we know. So it comes back to that. How do we facilitate that communication? The crucial element of pupil voice with the online world. So some key online safety recommendations that we make when it comes to school and trust leaders. Firstly, have an external safeguarding review. You need to robustly evaluate your online safety culture, your systems, your policies, your practice. You need that independent inspection-ready assurance and a clear list of actions. What's working well, but also what do we need to tweak? Secondly, make sure your DSLs have attended current high-quality DSL refresher training. We do it for lots of different local authorities. We do it for lots of different school groups. We write brand new courses every year that are based on research. So many providers do this kind of death by PowerPoint thing, and everybody just has to do it, do the online course, answer the multiple choice at the end. It needs to be something that is giving you a benefit. It needs to give you the opportunity not only to meet the requirements of keeping children safe, but really to understand how these risks are emerging and what we can do about it and the resources we can use. Thirdly, make sure governance is effective. Make sure that oversight is effective. Can your governors and trustees confidently challenge, scrutinise? Can they talk about online safety? Have they had an update? I mean, we do so many updates for governors around this topic because they need to know that this landscape is shifting because they're strategically responsible for responding to it. Fourthly, make sure your whole staff have had online safety training that goes beyond this is the policy. These are the 4 Cs. It needs to focus on recognition, reporting, that curiosity, what an online culture, a safe online culture looks like. Fifthly, regularly stress test your policies and your filtering and monitoring systems. Make sure they're effective in practice. I think we review hundreds of schools and colleges. I think we've had 3 now where we haven't got through the filtering systems within 5 minutes. You can point out where the holes are. It's really important that you test them because you know the children are going to find them. It's really important you can identify those as well. Sixthly, mentioned it already just now, make sure pupil voice informs your provision. It's an essential part of your provision, proactively responding and engaging those young people. And then finally, align your online safety practice with the other areas. It's not a distinct area of responsibility. It's a key part of safeguarding. It's linked to your behaviour policies and approaches. It's linked to those vulnerable children with SEND. It's linked to your mental health systems. It's really important that we recognise this overlap between vulnerability, exploitation, and digital harms. And so it needs to be integrated as part of your whole school approach, which again is why we'd recommend reviewing it externally. So if you need support from us, by all means, just get in touch. You can go onto brightcoreconsultancy.com. You can look at all of our different services there. And I mentioned the safeguarding reviews. Obviously, as many of you know, the other half of where we work is mental health and wellbeing as well. And you can find the full list of category of services that we provide. More than happy for you to just get in touch and let us know what you need, and we can support in that regard as well. And we'd recommend making sure that at least 1 or 2 a year you update, attend these kind of master classes so that you can see, right, a particular topic, how has that landscape changed? What does that look like? What are the resources I can use? And there's different ones for different roles within schools, but it's really important that we keep that training current and not just statutorily compliant. And from a mental health point of view, don't forget we've got an agreement to heavily subsidise those to support education settings as well. So mental health first aid courses. So again, by all means, access those if you need to. I think ultimately our focus as an organisation, I hope I've sort of conveyed that to you, is that we work with senior leaders when we're thinking about this topic to move online safety from compliance to confidence. Our focus is to help you ensure that your provision is defensible, it's effective, and it really is protecting those children, not just a policy that everyone has to read. So I hope that's been of use. A lot of content covered there, so thank you for your attention as we go through this. If you need to get in touch with us, drop us an email at connect@brightcoreconsultancy.com, scan that QR code, or just go onto the website and we'll help however we can. Okay, I'll stop sharing the screen and hand back to Alicia.